Kelly, here we are again for Ask Me Anything. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me again.
Great to see you. So in this episode, we're going to be discussing OSH issues and trends, which came up in questions submitted by members for Ask Me Anything. So let's get stuck in. First question is, in your opinion, why do companies often claim that health and safety are their top priority, yet in practice they tend to prioritise production over safety?
Do you know, I love this question because it is. We see it all the time, don't we? Safety is our number one priority, and yet they're still having accidents. We're still hurting people. I think it's probably a little bit more nuanced than that. I think it's safe operations are our top priority. And I think if we start looking at it like that, it becomes much more the reality. I think there are, I love it when people do say it because it's kind of a recognition that we want everybody to go home. We don't want to hurt people. We don't want people not going home. But there is also an element of reality that actually, if safety was a business's number one priority, they probably wouldn't be in operation because they would be managing their risks to the point where they're avoiding everything. So when businesses do talk about safety as their number one priority, I think it's important for us to be curious and kind of go, well, what do you mean by that? And what does that, how do you demonstrate that? Because if we end up dismissing it as something really cynical, it becomes quite dangerous for us to do that. I think safe operations is generally the way that people intend it, that actually we want our operations and the stuff that we do to be as safe as physically possible. And when we start to recognise health and safety as an enabler rather than a blocker, which I talk about so much, we recognise that health and safety is an integral part of how we do the work. And when we're really integrated into a business, then it becomes part of the DNA rather than being a priority. It's just part of the way that they do business.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And especially that point about if you manage risk so carefully, there's no innovation happening.
Yeah.
No one's really doing anything because you're sitting in a box, totally protected, but also not achieving anything. That wouldn't be good for the business. It wouldn't be good for society either. So getting that balance is really important, and health and safety being the enabler and not blocking progress and not blocking business. And I think one thing that IOSH is trying to do also is to get that health and safety in there at the beginning, and designing for safety, and especially when it comes to new technologies. Yeah. So that it's not an afterthought.
Yes.
And with all these rapid changes happening, health and safety is there in the beginning.
It's something that we see an awful lot in kind of construction or refurbs and stuff like that, when health and safety comes in at the end rather than is like right at the beginning when we're doing the planning and the designing of that kind of reconstruction or that refurb. We see it an awful lot. I've walked into sites and gone, but you haven't thought about that. Or yes, it's great that we've put this suite upstairs, but everybody that's going to use it is going to need additional support in getting downstairs in the event of a fire. So could we not have put that on the ground floor? And then we get that reputation of being a blocker and being difficult because actually we haven't been. The more we're involved at the beginning, the easier it is because we are thinking of all of those kind of worst case scenarios and thinking about how people are going to access, how people are going to maintain. It's just so important. The more we're involved at the beginning of that conversation, the easier it is for everybody.
Absolutely. So the next question, it's quite a long one, so bear with me, but it's about building and fire safety. So we're seeing some inconsistency in the way the Building Safety Regulator is responding to building safety cases submitted in accordance with the Building Safety Act. It seems to depend on the views of the individuals at the regulator who are reviewing each submission. We're also not seeing sufficient guidance being issued to support duty holders. Is this something IOSH is monitoring? And if so, are there any plans to support the property sector with this?
Yes, there have absolutely been kind of really clear inconsistencies around how the building safety regulator is responding to cases, and it does seem to be on that individual basis. That's really frustrating because it undermines confidence in the whole process. It creates so much uncertainty for everybody. We know a lot of the guidance has, turned up late or has lacked, an awful lot of detail, which makes it really difficult for those of us that are trying to provide that guidance and that support for our businesses. The IOSH construction community is really focused in on this, and they're working really closely with the Property Institute as well. So one of our vice presidents, Dr. Sean Lundy, is very heavily involved with that side of things and works with the Property Institution as well to try and help shore up the guidance and the support that we're getting. I think it's fair to say that IOSH is definitely monitoring that. The construction group is definitely working on that. And I think it's probably worth saying that if members are concerned or want additional support or want to get involved with providing that support and guidance for others, absolutely join our IOSH construction community.
Good answer. And do you think perhaps some of the inconsistency is because obviously there was new guidance brought in after Grenfell, and so it's relatively new. Do you think that's possibly where the issues are coming from?
I think absolutely it is. And I think as well what is really exciting is you see people who perhaps you see buildings that don't perhaps quite meet the criteria that are really desperate to do it as well. And because it's new, we're all still figuring it out. I'm sure we'll have the same when Martin's Law is coming. And I'm sure we'll see the same thing as that guidance kind of is potentially coming through. There will still be questions, there'll still be pushback. But that's, I think, as an industry, that's something that we're really good at, is being able to work with the people that are creating that guidance to really make sure that we're not making mistakes, we're making things as clear as possible, and we're making things as easy as possible to interpret and to understand.
So the advice to the member is there is some support already there, and if there's anything specific, to get in touch with the relevant people at
Yes,
IOSH.
Absolutely.
So next question is about offshore environments, and this member says offshore environments are known for their unique challenges, such as isolation, extended work rotations and high-risk operations. As IOSH president, what additional or tailored measures do you believe should be implemented in such workplaces to support the mental health and well-being of workers beyond the standard OSH protocols? You can tell we're not editing these questions, they're that long, right? How can leadership play a more proactive role in creating a resilient, supportive culture in these high-pressure settings?
Okay, you might have to remind me of the second part later. So while the kind of usual OSH protocols kind of are there and they are a good baseline, I think that because offshore is such a distinct kind of separate kind of environment, you've got that real physical isolation, you're doing an awful lot of high risk work. You've got extended rotations where you're away from your family and your support network for an awful long time. It might, depending on how that rotation is and how that fits, you may take a while to kind of decompress before you're then straight into another rotation. So I think, some of it is absolutely is the basics. Have proactive mental health support, whether that's peer support, mental health first aiders, confidential access to, employee assistance programs or phone numbers that you can call and talk to, and make sure that actually you're doing mental health and wellbeing check-ins as part of those rotations as well, and part of those debriefings when you've finished a rotation, so that actually you're making sure that wellbeing and mental health is something that becomes much easier to talk about. Let's reassess the rotation so that we're making sure that people aren't fatigued, that they are getting adequate rest, especially when they're in safety critical roles. One of the things that, our offshore community really focuses in on is one of those things of recognising the difficulty in transitioning between home and work, and that can be really, really difficult for people when they're working offshore. I think as well, it's around, making sure that the areas that people have got to rest, those kind of breakout areas, that environment is really comfortable and relaxing. Maybe don't stick it right next to the boiler house where it's still really noisy and you can still hear an awful lot of the stuff going on. I remember doing it during COVID when we had a team go out and they had a really extensive period of isolation, and we arranged it so that they were all on one floor. They were all essentially isolated in one bubble, and we created games and like mini competitions for them to do, and like they videoed them and shared them out with the rest of the business, and it was all really little silly elements of being silly together and actually playing games and stuff like that really helped. And developing that culture where psychological safety is as important as physical safety and as important as monitoring, HAVs and noise-induced hearing loss. And let's challenge our leadership as well. Let's include mental health and wellbeing KPIs as how we measure success. And then there was a second part to the question that I can't remember.
Before we get onto the second part, but perhaps there's a point we can make as well about in those offshore environments, they do tend to be male sort of environments. And we're speaking about well-being and mental health, and perhaps some extra effort needs to be put into enabling those male workers to talk about their mental health in this very tough environment where classically it wouldn't be a very welcome thing to open up and say you're not feeling okay. So is there anything specific that IOSH would say about that, or what kind of support is there for I think male workers in those environments?
I think that's really interesting. We see it an awful lot in construction as well, and perhaps that's something that I'm going to put a challenge out to our construction and offshore communities to see whether there's something that they can be doing to work together and learn from each other about best practice. I think it often takes a couple of really brave, and it's really easy for us as two women to sit here and talk about mental health, but or easier is the perception, I suppose. But I think it takes it probably takes a handful of really brave men to be open and to be comfortable with being vulnerable about their own experiences in order to be able to maybe open up, make other men around them feel that it's okay to open up and it is okay not to be okay.
Yeah. On that point, I remember the session at the Health and Safety Show that you were part of, and Gary Latta and Richard Bate. Yeah. And you all spoke about your really personal experiences and some of the things that Gary and Richard said. It was really, they were so gripping and intense, the things they've experienced and seen and had to deal with. And I'm sure the whole audience was sitting there thinking, it's incredible that these leaders are standing there on stage and saying what happened to them and how they felt and how they dealt with it, and the fact they're still dealing with, the trauma of having experienced what they experienced. So I reckon that's a really good example of men standing up and saying what happened and how they felt.
I was incredibly proud of the pair of them for that. We talk quite a lot in the presidential team about trying to lead loudly. One of my themes being around kind of professional well-being is actually we spend so much time looking after everybody else. Let's talk about how we look after ourselves. And me and a friend of mine, Tracy Dangerfield, who kind of chaired that discussion, we'd been talking about doing something around that kind of topic and how we deal with trauma and the feelings of guilt afterwards. And Doc and Gary both jumped up at the chance. They stuck their hands up and was like, "Yeah, I want to be able to talk about this." And I think it is really important. I can talk about mine, but actually having men from very different backgrounds, having gone through awful trauma and are still dealing with it, but being able to stand up there and go, but also look at where I am, look at what I'm doing, and actually using it not as a benefit, but actually kind of going, it's changed the way I am as a health and safety professional. And I think if there is a silver lining around it, it's made me a better health and safety professional. But yeah, that ability for men to stand up and be vulnerable and talk about some of the most darkest and most traumatic events in their lives, I couldn't have been prouder of them.
That's a lovely thing to say, and I do hope they're listening. So I think you've probably answered the second part of that question, which was, I'll just say it again, how can leadership play a more proactive role in creating a resilient and supportive culture in these high-pressure settings? So some of that is the leading loudly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is leading loudly. I think it is turning around and going, even if it's little things like turning around and going, I'm missing my missus, or I'm missing my kids today. Allowing other people to have the space to know that that's okay, and they're probably feeling the same thing. That visible commitment as well, I think really becomes really, really important. It's not just words on a page, it's not just a poster, it's how your leadership lives and breathes. I don't think anybody wants to just see their leadership when they're going around doing a safety audit. I love things like back to the tools days or back to the shop floor days where leadership, stick on their PPE and go and do the work with their teams, because I think that's a really great equaliser. And it means that the teams are less likely to see you as somebody that sits in an ivory tower and, lectures, from a completely different place. And that means that they are more likely to come to you with problems and with issues and with concerns that they've got, whether that's personal, professional or operational concerns as well.
I think that goes back to something we've said before in a different episode about seeing the human.
Yes.
Now, it was in a different context because then we were speaking about the internet and how things kind of get out of hand on social media with comments and things. But we were talking about remembering there's a person at the end of whatever's happening.
Yeah.
And this is kind of a different version where, okay, that's the boss, but that's a person too with their own issues and their own sort of mental health that needs to be taken care of. And I guess this is about breaking down barriers and making sure that somebody who does want, to reach out or need support can do. But equally, if you're fine, you can just carry on.
You could be fine too.
Doing your business, and you don't have to be kind of, you don't have to sit there and say how you feel if you're okay, actually.
But I think sometimes we spend so much time looking at mental health as this negative thing, or this implication that when we talk about mental health, we're talking about poor mental health. Actually, if people are positive and they're enjoying their work, let's share that too. We spend so much time at work. I find it bizarre that people don't necessarily always enjoy or aren't lucky enough to be able to enjoy what they do. But if people have found really good ways of dealing with things, let's share that as well.
So, next question. This one, I think it could be a great discussion, actually. Very much like this one. Do you think different personality styles see and manage risk differently? And as psychological safety is a big discussion at the moment, do different personality styles need different things in order to feel psychologically safe at work? So an interesting sort of psychology discussion there.
The short answer is yes, absolutely. Of course they do. I remember reading something a little while ago that said, if the zombie apocalypse ever happened, I want to be surrounded by people who are neurodivergent. I want to be surrounded with people who have ADHD because they think outside of the box. They see risk differently, and all. There were so many positives around it. I was like,
you're going to say that the brains are more tasty for the zombies, and
therefore I'm protected. Yeah,
providing a menu.
Yeah, and hopefully they won't come at me. I think of course we do, because it's one of those things that we hear all the time is health and safety is just common sense. And it can't be common sense, because if it was common sense, we wouldn't have jobs, because everybody would go, oh yes, that's dangerous, I'm not going to do that. We'd all understand risk in exactly the same way. I mean, whether it's kind of different personality styles, if you're talking like the traditional kind of Myers-Briggs and stuff like that, I think we all think differently, and you look at different people and the way that they perceive risk, and that also doesn't just come from their personality. It also comes from whether they've got any underlying mental health issues. It also comes to whether they are neurodivergent. There's so many different factors. Also, it's the nature versus nurture. We can probably talk about this for hours. I love this as a concept. We know that two of the bigger risk groups that we have are people, younger people who are entering into the workplace because they are less risk aware. They are keener to prove themselves. And, I think I read somewhere a while ago that it isn't until you're probably about 17, 18 that you actually have a concept of how fast something is travelling towards you. So we teach our kids, you look both ways before you cross the street. We teach ourselves to do dynamic risk assessments before we actually have that language. So yeah, I think if we are going to embrace this idea that everybody perceives risk differently, you get 5 health and safety professionals in a room to do a risk assessment, you're going to get 6 different risk assessments, realistically, because we all perceive risk differently. It's from our own experiences, and I am definitely rambling now because I've got very excited about this as a concept. So yeah, I think, as health and safety professionals, we need to have conversations around risk perception and hazard perception and understanding the way that other people perceive risk. The amount of times you see, teenagers particularly doing really at-risk behaviour or really risky behaviour and going, but shouldn't they know better? It's like, well, no, that's part of being a teenager, isn't it? It's pushing those boundaries and, shifting your risk perception. And I think that's what we do across our careers as well. I think it's a really, really interesting angle and something that I think we could probably do an entire podcast series just on talking about risk perception, and whether it's particular personality traits or whether it's, your own experiences and the way that you're wired. I think this could. I'm getting very excited and stumbling over my words.
I'll see you back here next week then.
But I think it's a really interesting way of coming at kind of understanding risk and understanding different people's perception of hazard, and how we manage that. Might have a think about that and write something for the magazine.
Please do. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about the second part of that, because the question says, do different personality styles need different things in order to feel psychologically safe at work? So what would that actually mean for OSH professionals?
I think that's a really interesting question. We know that even if we just take neurodivergency, I know that's not a personality trait, but bear with me. Even if we just take people who are neurodivergent, and, somebody with autism may need things in a very different way than somebody with ADHD, may need something very different from somebody who has, opposite defiance disorder. If you instruct somebody with ODD, they are not going to do it. They're just not going to do it. Yeah. Where somebody with ADHD, you turn around and go, can you do the washing up? And they've literally got the gloves on and they go, well, no, now you've told me to do it, I'm not going to do it now. Like, there's so many different ways that we can address things, and I think that's part of the thing that it makes me so excited about being a health and safety professional. Is it is all about the people that you're working with, and what they need. And I don't know whether the INTJ, EN, whatever, ENSP, all of those are necessarily that helpful. I think it puts us all into kind of 4 different, several different boxes. I think some of us kind of blend across quite a lot of them. But I think as health and safety professionals, that's where that kind of curiosity and that coaching element comes in, is what do you need from me in order to make sure that you're safe? And if we flip that question around, rather than it being a reliance on us making those decisions for those individuals, if we can then flip it around and get them to reflect and figure out what information they need in order to understand that hazard or understand that risk mitigation, rather than just going, because I said so, which isn't helpful for that many people. I think it becomes much more collaborative, and people take much more ownership of it. And I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it.
And obviously, people at work being able to say what they need or something they're struggling with, that is part of having the psychologically safe environment where you feel comfortable to say, oh, actually, I would like to have that in writing because I understand it better. Yeah. Or I need earphones because it's too noisy in here, I can't focus. Yeah.
Or don't give it to me in writing, show me.
Yeah.
It goes into different learning. What's your preferred learning style? What's your preferred route of, receiving information? Do you like to be instructed? Do you like to be collaborated with? Like, there's lots of different ways we can come at this. But I think you're absolutely right. The first and foremost is, how do we create those psychologically safe places where people are open enough for us to go, actually, I have really severe dyslexia. Please don't write to me. Like, show me. I can do it if you show me. Or do not instruct me, because my immediate reaction is going to be, I won't do what you tell me. Yeah. It's interesting. It reminds me of Tracy and I did a webinar a while ago on the word should. And we literally just looked at the word should and how we're told that from a really young age. And it is quite a judgment word. And how people tend to fall into two categories. They either do the rage against the machine, I won't do what you tell me, or they have this kind of victim mentality around it. Definitely worth a little watch if you haven't watched that one yet. I think that one's really interesting. And she challenged me to change the word should in my vocabulary to could, which gave me many more options. It made me feel like I was not judging myself as much, but giving myself a bit more creative options and a bit more ownership, which is really interesting. Just the power of switching one word. Yeah. Which was, really good.
There are other examples of that sort of thing, power of language. So if you say, I have to exercise today, it feels bad.
Yes.
But if you say, I get to exercise today,
yes,
it feels good.
Yes.
Because it means, you are free to choose to do that. Maybe you're lucky enough to have a body that is, movable. You can exercise, you can get out of your chair and do that thing. So just that one word changes the perspective.
Yeah.
So language is powerful, and let's not underestimate it. Obviously, as an editor, I'm a big fan of the power of words.
Absolutely.
The next question is, how can we stop disability discrimination in the workplace?
I think that's I mean, it would be amazing if we could, wouldn't it? So my best friend at uni was in a wheelchair, and one of our favourite games used to be go around London shopping and see how many people panicked when we tried to get her in the door in a wheelchair, and suddenly realising that shops have put their clothing racks out so narrow that she couldn't get through, and they didn't have disabled access for her, and she used to get really, really angry and frustrated about it, until then we started making a game out of it, because it was actually rather amusing how many places are just not geared up. I say amusing because otherwise you'd genuinely probably sit and cry with frustration about it. And I think this is the difficulty, isn't it? Is sometimes businesses just very simply decide that it's too difficult. That actually it's way too difficult, so we're just going to say no. And that I find really concerning. There are there are an awful lot of organisations where you need to make sure that their values are aligned. And if they're not aligned with what you need, there will be other places that you can find. And I think that's also part of our job as well. We need to work as occupational health and safety professionals. We need to work alongside HR, alongside occupational health, to help people stay in work. And whether that's an adaptation of their desk, whether that's an adaptation of the job, whether that's, I've just done a big piece of work with the Guide Dogs Association. I have a member of staff who is really poorly sighted and has a guide dog, and how there's something so beyond my knowledge. But, the Guide Dogs Association is absolutely where I went for that advice. And they have funding available for us to bring somebody in to, let the dog out if we need to, or for us to build a kennel, an outside kennel for the dog, so that we've got that support in place to enable our visually impaired member of staff to stay in work, because they love what they do. We need to make sure that we are kind of collaborating and that this is not something that is done to an individual, but been done with an individual, and certainly not a case of, I've already got somebody with autism, so I know what you need. No.
That's like that whole thing of, I've got a gay friend, or I have a black friend, that. Right?
Yes. That makes my skin crawl. Yeah, exactly. Like, every single individual is different. And we need to, I think I spoke about it previously, is we need to make sure that, we need to remember that our number one job is to protect the people that we work with. My mum fell over at work and broke her wrist last year. And unfortunately, an awful lot of her work is done on a computer and answering the phone and all of that. And she is unable to do her job anymore. But as somebody who sits within occupational health, I'm sitting there going, yeah, but there's talk to type, and there's, she could have a headset and, answer the phone in a different way. And, and actually the biggest difficulty is how we could have got her to work, because public transport is a problem, and she can't drive because of her arm. So actually having kind of very directly sat there with it, it's, unfortunately she's now going to be medically retired because she fell over and broke her wrist. She also got complex regional pain syndrome from it. So the actual healing of it has taken an awful lot longer. So there is lots. If we don't know the answer to something, the answer shouldn't be automatically no. We should absolutely be going and reaching out to specialist charities, other health and safety people we know. We should be working alongside occupational health. We should be working with our HR colleagues, and we should be making it as easy as possible for people to stay in work and to come and join us at work. There are obviously some roles that people, potentially with physical disabilities cannot do because of the nature of the role, but that doesn't mean that there isn't something else out there for them.
Absolutely. And with the way the world of work is changing and the different types of technologies we have now, including, the famous AI, there are lots of tools and technologies that are powered by AI that will help people who have different abilities.
Yes.
Which is one of the positives. So we'll come back to AI and new technologies a bit later on.
Yeah.
So the next question here is, this member says there are personal health and welfare concerns that are technically not safety, but have the potential to impact a person severely, for example, vaping, which can cause brain damage. So when is the right time to say a personal welfare concern is significant enough that we should act? We would all act if someone were drinking or taking drugs at work. So what's your view on that, Kelly?
Oh, I think it's really difficult, isn't it? I think, we talk about, the dangers of smoking. We talk about the dangers of drinking alcohol, taking illicit substances. But actually, as health and safety professionals, as occupational health and safety professionals, do we have the right to dictate what somebody else is doing outside of work? It reminds me of the control of lead regulations and the control of lead at work regulations, and having to monitor people, but also understanding whether they're exposed to lead at home as well. So if you go fishing every weekend, you're likely exposing yourself to lead because that's what you use for the weights for the fishing line and stuff like that. So I think we can influence, we can provide information, we can provide support. One of the things that I'm always really proud of is when, we talk about drugs and alcohol, is always making sure that we have a policy in place that first and foremost directs people to support rather than punishing them. So if you have, we have non-smoking venues. Nobody can smoke indoors anymore. Some places do not allow smoking at all on their property, which is actively encouraging people to go elsewhere. But it's very much for us. It's around that education, that influence. But we are not in a position to be able to insist, are we? It's a really fine balance that we have to do.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of the situation the NHS is in, where you could say, okay, let's not operate on this person because they're an alcoholic, right? And with something like vaping, well, you could say, what if you have a worker who's severely obese and it's having an impact on their health and their safety? It's something that's very personal, not easy to tackle, and where is that line of who can say what about this thing that this individual person is doing? But vaping, probably is in that area of that's a personal freedom they can do, and then it's down to the company about things like what spaces are free from vaping and smoking and so on. Okay, so next question is, we're on to the subject of AI.
Excellent.
Yep, it's a big one. So this member asks, what are your thoughts on the use of AI in health and safety? And really, that could be a long list of thoughts, couldn't it?
So I have and I feel quite embarrassed that it's taken me to this point to discover this woman. Professor Stephanie Hare is... she does an awful lot with the BBC, literally specifically talking about AI and generative AI and the differences between, we can, as health and safety professionals, we can use AI to generate our reports, to gather and do an initial analysis of our data, which means that we're not chained to our desks, that we get to go out an awful lot more and get to engage with people. I'm definitely not suggesting in any way, shape or form that AI is ever going to take our jobs. I don't think it is. I remember there being a conversation around kind of radiographers, and AI was going to get rid of... You don't need to train any more radiographers. AI is going to get rid of all of them. And actually, people didn't understand what radiographers did, and AI has made part of their job easier, but absolutely that human filter still absolutely is needed there. We can embrace the technology. I think it's also really important, especially if you're within kind of risk management, which health and safety, us as health and safety people are. I think it's really important for us to understand whether it is needed, and not just because it's a hot topic that we go, oh, we've got to have it because otherwise we're going to miss out. I think it's working in the leisure industry, we can use AI to track people who are swimming, and it will monitor people's movements, and it will tell you, oh, this person's been under the water for 20 seconds, but they're moving, so we're going to highlight them in orange. And oh, hang on a second, this person's been under the water for 30 seconds and they're not moving and they're very much at the bottom of the pool, so we're going to send an alarm out.
Yep.
It does not mean we're getting rid of our lifeguards in any way, shape or form. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's a tool to be used. It's not a tail wag the dog kind of scenario. And I think if we get into that scenario, it becomes it can potentially become quite dangerous. So yeah, I think if we continue to use it for, reducing our admin load, making sure that we're still reviewing it, and we're still questioning it and we're still challenging it, don't think it's going to get rid of us. I think what it does is it enables us to do the human-centric side of things, of actually going out and engaging with our people, going and talking to them about the risks and concerns that they have and the hazards that they face, and definitely frees us up from our desks a little bit more.
That was actually a really concise answer to what is a huge topic. I would also like to flag up that we have an article in the July-August issue of the magazine, which is called The Human's Guide to AI, which we thought would be a nice idea because we've gone back to basics and we've actually asked and answered all the questions that you are possibly too scared to ask about AI, as in, what is it? What can it do? Why is it here? Where did it come from? And that's all in July-August issue. So look out for that one. It'll be in print and online as well. And of course, this subject is just going to keep coming back, which is why we thought, let's just, establish what is AI first. Let's get comfortable with that, and then move into, all the complexities and how it can affect health and safety in different sectors and, AI in construction, etc. Next question. So this question is from someone who says they are currently working at Google DeepMind. I would absolutely love to know who this person is. It's a fascinating job.
Yes.
Get in touch. Can we do an interview? Amazing work. And this person says, do you think the Health and Safety at Work Act needs updating to align with modern work environments?
No. It's the very short answer. No, I don't. I don't think it does. I think, we had lots of conversations last year when it came to the anniversary of the Health and Safety at Work Act, and actually, as a foundation, it is there. It essentially says, if you create the risk or the hazard, it is your job to manage it. You are there to look after the health, safety, and welfare of your people and anybody impacted by their acts or omissions. So anything that they do or don't do. And I think that as a fundamental is a really good place to be. If it was wonderfully clear cut and, we have lots of other different pieces of legislation, don't we? We've got the management regs, we've got, something very specifically looking at asbestos, at lead, at PPE, like PURE, LOLA. I can shout out a whole another load of acronyms. We have additional pieces of legislation that add to it. It's always an interesting conversation because, where does mental health sit? Should it be health and safety or HR? My argument is always that actually it's health in health. It's the health in health and safety, or it's part of the health in health and safety. And it's part of the welfare in health, safety and welfare. And I think that, an awful lot of it can be interpreted and can be understood through the regulation that we already have. Would I be... So no is the very short answer to that. I don't think it should be changed.
And obviously we, based on what you said about the people creating the risk and should also be part of managing that risk. Hopefully the person working at Google DeepMind and their colleagues are analysing that risk and anticipating risk and so on. And that is part of the work they're doing there. and really, I would love to learn more about what they are doing. So please come and talk to me.
I think, as AI, becomes more and more part of our everyday lives, you know, there are other ways of us monitoring and regulating that rather than ripping up the foundations of everything from a health and safety perspective and starting again.
So next question is bringing IOSH into this equation. So this member asks, please explain how IOSH is evolving with AI and the Internet of Things around the world.
Oh, I think that's a really good question.
It is.
So, I think there are lots of things, aren't there? So, I will say that IOSH is definitely not here to recommend. They're definitely not going to sit and recommend one particular piece of AI, whether that's generative or the kind of more traditional AI, or any of the tools, or even, access to the internet. We're not going to sit and recommend any of that. It is for us as individual health and safety professionals to kind of decide. Jo, you just mentioned in the July-August issue of the IOSH magazine, you've got anything you wanted to know about AI, but we're too afraid to ask, which I will definitely be looking up. There are lots of conversations. I know I've mentioned her already, but Professor Stephanie Hare does a session on BBC World News specifically around AI and emerging technologies, which I think is really fascinating and definitely one for our CPD, especially those of us that may think we know everything already. I think there are lots of positives, and IOSH as an organisation, we can use the data that we've got and use AI in order to be able to understand that data better, potentially. But I think we also have to be aware of the potential limitations of AI as well, that depending on what it is fed, depends on what comes out of it. There have been lots of cases where very obvious pieces of generative AI have made up legislation to suit or create an answer for people, and have made up things that are actually, or taken legislation from another country and applied it into a country where it's not relevant. So I wouldn't necessarily be going to any particular generative AI chat thing to ask questions about legislation. There are far more reputable places to go for that information. AI might be able to predict outcomes, but also doesn't necessarily understand us as human beings fully yet, and recognises that every single one of us is an individual. That can, the more that we rely on AI, it can lead to, inaccurate forecasts or misleading predictions, which then feeds into kind of poor decision making within a business. So I think it is really important that we make sure that we're using it for the reasons that we need to, rather than just jumping on it because we need it, because we think we need it.
It kind of feels like everybody needs to sort of become a journalist or put the journalist's hat on, because journalists, we automatically go, well, who is saying that? Why are they saying it? And you check your sources, you cross-reference things. And of course, that's what we do with the magazine, where there's a huge amount of human brain power that goes into making that magazine and getting it as accurate as possible and checking things, which, at the moment, that's not something that is done by AI. And AI, as you said, it's something that, there's some great things about it, but also some flaws. And it's something that, okay, it's got this name, artificial intelligence, but it was created by humans and therefore is deeply flawed, as wonderful and innovative and creative as people are. So, it's changing, and just keep your eye on it. Yeah. So last question from this session. How do you see emerging technologies like AI and wearable safety tech shaping the future of occupational safety, and how can IOSH help members to adapt?
So I think that kind of wearable safety tech is really exciting. I mean, it has been around for a long time in things like dosimeters, and noise alarms and various bits. We've had that kind of tech, just not as advanced as it is now. We're able to do it when we talk about people who are working outside, and their exposure to the sun and the heat, and how they are as an individual reacting, and it will alert them when they need to take a break, rather than expecting people to push through. There are lots of things like that are really exciting and will make our jobs easier, to be able to kind of understand that there are huge amounts of benefits to them, but also they have limitations. As all of it, isn't there? It's AI has massive benefits, but also has massive limitations, and we need to be aware of that. Presently, I think we see an awful lot of the kind of the wearable tech, hand-on vibration monitoring and all of that. It still needs human input. It still needs a human oversight, and I think that's really important. And I think as health and safety professionals, we really need to be aware that there is lots of that out there, and we can go and play with it, and we can go and do our own research. I don't think IOSH, from a central perspective, is ever going to recommend one piece of tech over another. I'm sure as AI grows and develops, we'll have many more articles, not just the one on anything you wanted to know but were too afraid to ask. And I think communities, it's something that our communities can focus in on as well. And I think you've got to start with that question of why do we need it as a business? What problem is it that I'm trying to solve? And are we always going to make sure that we have that human oversight and that human analysis as well?
I think that is a really good point to end on. And we've covered so much ground in this session on OSH issues and OSH trends. And just it's really interesting to hear your responses to these members' questions. So I hope everyone who's listening has enjoyed hearing what your answers are. And thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for participating and Ask Me Anything and answering all these questions.